got a lot of things that I want to say, and it's all kind of jumbled up in here, so hopefully it makes sense. Let me first of all talk just a little bit about my background. I really should probably get into the full story, but you'll notice that within my spirituality, I use the Bible all the time. And that's because I know it like the back of my hand. Spent many years deep in that religion. The story is actually quite fascinating. And it took an absolute bloodbath of my own blood to get me out of it. Now, whether you believe that that was God's doing or Satan's, well, let me just refer you back to one passage that is quoted all the time. You will know a tree by its fruits. Now, being raised in the Bible Belt, let me back up for a second and say that if you're a fundamentalist in any religion, but especially in Christianity, meaning that you have the view that's just very common in the South here in America. It's very rigid, very literal. I would recommend that you not watch these videos, especially if you're doing well. My path is not... Why in the world would anybody assume that anybody else's path should be like their own? I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense. We're all unique. I mean, it would be like saying we should all live on the same diet. There's a ton of spiritual genetic diversity out there, and that's something that needs to be acknowledged. But you know, I would much rather anyone stay where they're at than plow up their garden and live in that chaos. If you are not, especially if you don't leave these things for the right reason. And the horror stories that Christians and other groups always love to wave in your face are normally people that leave for the wrong reasons. They're people that have been very psychologically suppressed, psychologically abused, I will say, yes. And they have absolutely no skill whatsoever. It would be like taking a horse that's super domesticated and just like releasing it into the wild with no guidance. And then they're like, well, see, that horse died. And I'm like, yeah, I bet it did. It had no training. It had nothing. So don't, you know, I'm going to say this right now, like, just turn back. Now, if you're caught up in a religion, or you feel like there's no place for you in religion, then these things that I'm sharing can be extremely helpful. Because at the end of the day, like I said before, man cannot live by bread alone. All right? So you've got to start figuring out how to strengthen your inner self. And there's lots and lots of ways of doing that. There's lots and lots of religions that delve into that. But there is one universal principle, no matter where you're at, that I find is true. And it was best summarized by Paul when he said, the letter of the law, meaning that the structure kills. Like the literal interpretation kills. But the spirit, the essence, the beating heart, the very, you know, the deepest part gives life. The spirit gives life. And wow, I mean, it is universally true, I believe, because See, when you make the shadow what is worshipped rather than the form, you're going to always go off track. Always, because the shadow is never the form. Now, if some being, which pretty much everyone, especially Taoists, agree is undefinable and incomprehensible, wants to reveal something to us simple, ants caught in a 3D space. I mean, oh, what a bummer to be limited to a 3-dimensional space that is so dominated by the physical world, which in turn is dominated by survival of the fittest. This is a whole tangent, but that's why I believe this is hell. Earth is hell. And basically the life journey is figuring out how to, like the psalmist says, if I make my bed in hell, you are there. Discovering that in the darkest place you can find light, and when you find that light in this dark place, I mean, I really believe that is the beginning of the journey. Every spiritual being must be birthed out of a dark womb. And this happens to be our dark womb. So if you take any of these religious texts and you build this entire structure, a 3-dimensional structure, I believe that you've already created a house in which God does not dwell. A temple built with human hands. You know, all of this stuff, I believe, all of these texts, all these myths, all this wisdom, all of it, I believe, is basically a shadow to get you to understand a form which is extremely incomprehensible. So it's important that you, even if you want to stay within a particular religion, that you understand you got to dive deep. You got to dive really deep. And you've got to be willing to let go of a lot of these rigid ideas. And to Christians in particular, that sounds like heresy, and maybe it is. Like, I don't know. There's, as I get further and further in life, I realize there's more and more that I just don't know. I don't know. I just don't know. And that in itself is where it gets tricky, because the minute that you start creating this religious structure, like this goes here, that goes there, you start building the temple, as it says, according to the exact pattern that was given for the 3-dimensional form. And that temple becomes your idol, because that is the place where you think God dwells. And so people congregate to temples and all of these things looking for God in the 3-dimensional world. It's like, no, the temple was there as a pattern, is what it says in Hebrews. It was there just to show you that the Holy of Holies, like the place where God actually dwells, the sacred place, the place that no one could get to until the veil was torn, is inside, is deep inside. God is within you. There is some connection to this other dimension and our hidden dimension, which is in here. And so for thousands and thousands of years, people have squabbled over religion and interpretations of this text or that text. And I went further than more Americans have ever gone into Christianity as far as obedience and dedication. And I did find it altogether useless. I shouldn't say that. It was a very useful stage. But interestingly enough, the closer that I got to perfecting my temple, my three-dimensional temple, the more my inner temple deteriorated. And that also is a universal theme, i.e. the Pharisees. And it's quite interesting that that Christians bash the Pharisees all the time, not even understanding that they took Jesus's teachings and created a whole nother religion. So it's like he was dismantling one religion just to create another. Now, I'm going to leave it there. We could get into lots of debates about that, but I've looked into it. I have really dug in deep into that, and this idea that Christianity could just like piggyback off of Judaism, at least the form we have today, it does not hold up. It just doesn't hold up theologically. It doesn't hold up. Even the Jews can shred all of that. I say even the Jews. The reason I say it like that is because Christians often bash Jews as in, well, the only reason they didn't accept Jesus is because they were fucking stupid. And it's like, no, you got to understand, they hold more Nobel Prizes than any people group in the world, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, the amount of just, oh my God, unbelievable, like, wisdom and intelligence that comes out of that ethnicity is breathtaking. And and I don't think it's about the ethnicity as much as it's about family structures and different things like that. And anyways, so to write them off as stupid is in fact very stupid. When you really start to study like why they rejected Jesus and all of that, it makes a lot of sense. And then of course you've got other scholars on top of that, like Bart Ehrman, who approaches it just simply from a scholarly perspective, and I see no way around those things. The arguments are ridiculously strong, and to check this, I even would watch debates, between top-level fundamentalists and people like Bart Ehrman, and man, oh man, it is just to me, there's no contest. I mean, just knockout every time. So what do you do with that? Well, I do believe that Jesus fulfilled what the Jews were hoping for, but he did it in the spirit. And even though a lot of what he did was probably let me think about how to say this. He was a very close pattern, but maybe not the exact pattern. And why would that need to be the case anyways? It's never about the pattern. It's always about what the pattern represents. So whether Jesus literally did something or it was part of the mythology, I mean, I don't know. Like, I just don't know. There's a lot of things that are very odd. For example, I've heard thousands of sermons and I can't remember a single one from any of them. So how is it that the Sermon on the Mount was transcribed perfectly? And then you get things like divine inspiration and those kind of answers. And I clearly all religious texts are divinely inspired. They come from this deepest place. But they're also like art. They're not something that is exact or perfect. They're meant to be viewed as a picture, and you take in the essence. You don't sit there and get out a magnifying glass to look at a work of art. You stand back. You stand back and you see the full painting. And from that you derive meaning. It's just getting out a microscope, looking at the Mona Lisa. I mean, yeah, maybe if you're a nerd trying to understand, the paint and whatnot, but if you really want to feel, if you want something to hit you in here, put that microscope away and just step back. So I believe that Jesus was extraordinary. He is by far the highest person on my totem pole of spiritual figures, to the point that I do suspect that there was something extraordinarily divine about him, to the point that I wonder even if he was like the ultimate pattern, born into the ultimate religion. Because I'm not sure it was about Judaism or Christianity at all. I mean, let's just say that over time, the divine is watching the evolution of consciousness. From everything to a goldfish, all the way up to lizards, and then birds, and then mammals, and then Homo sapiens. It's like, okay, all right, they're getting out of the caves, they're starting to see the sun, starting to think about things. And that's where the Bible starts to come alive, when you start to view it that way, as a book about the evolution of consciousness. Because if you look back in the garden, something very interesting happened. It's not about a snake and an apple. Get that out of your head. First of all, it was not an apple. Go into the book of Enoch and you'll see what it was like, but even then, there's a really strong case to be made that it was figurative, that the writer wanted you to read behind the lines. It was also not a snake. In Hebrew, that word, when you really dig into it, is most likely describing a scaly one, which would be a seraphim, some kind of spiritual entity. All right. So what does all that mean? Well, you had Adam and Eve, which were, they were innocent, as in not self-conscious. You can think about a child. When does a young child ever feel guilt? Hardly ever, until they're given the law. Then they start feeling guilt, because now they have to work out what is good and what is evil. And that is a grueling task. And honestly, I think it's an old stage of consciousness that we have to work our way out of. Now, that doesn't mean there's no good and evil, and it doesn't mean that I don't care about doing good and avoiding evil. It's just a very, it's such a low form of consciousness that it's not helpful in dealing with the main issue. It's how do you increase love in your life and everyone else's. Okay, so the temptation was, you eat this, whatever this was, and then you become as God through what? Knowledge of good and evil. That is the law. That is basically the law, summed up. Become like God through your knowledge of good and evil. Do what is good and avoid what is evil, and you will be exactly like Christ, or you'll be acceptable to Moses, or wherever you find yourself, you're acceptable to the three-dimensional structure. Congratulations. Now, Jesus's main problem with the Pharisees, and I find this is true today, it's always going to be true, is that the people that believe they can do this the most turn out to be the worst people on the planet. Man, and you know, I'm not trying to bash anyone. I have been all things at some point in time. Maybe not as extreme, but all things. I've been the hater. I've been the predator. I've been the thief. I've been the robber. I've been the abuser. I've been the liar. I've been the cheater. You know, I've been the Pharisee. I've been all of those things. At any point in time, if I had been given just a bit of power, I mean, I could have ended up like anyone else, like any politician or any other person that is continually bashed. I don't believe in bashing people, not at all. But the problem is the people that believe that they can ascend through the knowledge of good and evil, the ones that believe that the most are actually the worst. And we could make a very strong philosophical case for that, but you know, I want to keep this video short, and to be honest, Jesus did a thorough job of exposing all of those things. Now, I find that Christians are quite clever, and because they're aware of Jesus's animosity towards the Pharisees, they tend to very cleverly articulate, or else quote unquote live out things in a non-religious way. Again, we could go take a deep dive into that, but I would just refer you to a Messianic Jew named Aaron Budgen with Living God Ministries. That's about as deep as you can possibly go into how easily that goes off track, and how you basically, when you do that, you trade that for the essence of Christ. Like, there is no real combining the two. Okay. So anyways, they eat of the garden. They eat this fruit. And then what's the first thing that happens as they're trying to work out the knowledge of good and evil? It says, well, first of all, they hid themselves. But when God asked, "Why are you hiding?" Adam said, I was afraid. I was afraid. And oh man, see, if you want to understand something like in HVAC, if you want to understand cold, well, you need to understand heat, right? Yep. To understand darkness, you need to understand light, and vice versa. Which is probably why we're here right now, because if you are a light being, if that is true, there is no way to really mature past, there's no way to get to a certain point without being first in darkness. As it says, he first descended and then ascended. That is the pattern. And I believe that that you have, yes, you're going to have to understand choices, empathy, even wickedness, all hurt, pain, love, hate, all of these things. Like, you have to learn in order to be fully spiritually mature. Or I shouldn't even say that, really, because I don't know that that's, I don't think that's a path that ever ends. You have to know all of that in order to take your next step, to evolve to the next point. Okay. But they were afraid, and so they hid themselves. And you will find that as you dive deeper and deeper into the knowledge of good and evil, oh boy, you actually dive deeper into fear. And you mistake getting close to religion, like being in the temple, as being close to God, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Nothing could be farther from the truth, because it's actually fear that causes you to do all of these things and like, you know, cover yourself. Like Jesus said, I didn't come to be a patch on an old covering. He was to be a completely new, in fact, I would say not a covering at all, maybe just a tearing away of everything that is there so you could be naked without shame again before the divine. Now, a lot of people will say exactly what they said to Paul, which is, well, you know, if we don't live that way and we just get rid of shame, what's to keep us from sinning? Same thing they asked Paul. I don't know. Maybe it's because the divine in you doesn't rejoice in brokenness and death and oppression and bondage and all of these things. So if you free, it would be like saying, I will free the divine in myself and then I will go eat dog shit. It's like, no. You free the divine in yourself, and then you have set before you a wonderful table of spiritual life. So there's this weird idea that, like, God within is really not strong enough to to overcome evil. So we have to have all our structures and all our rules and all this kind of thing, which I think is actually very, very necessary in a certain stage, because, you know, I wouldn't trust children to live without the law. It's kind of like they need it. They need some, they have to go through that stage. But eventually, I don't want them to love their partner because it's the law. I want them to love their partner because they're actually, like, they have become love. They have become that. And so they can live that out, and they can pour that out from here, not from here. Okay? So anyways, Adam and Eve are hiding. And it says that they covered themselves with fig leaves. Have you ever wondered why Jesus cursed the fig tree? The symbol, I'm telling you, the Bible, it's all symbols. It's all symbols. Like, I'm pretty sure some of it happened. I don't know if all of it happened. Like, I have no idea. I don't know where these religious texts come from. They're all breathtaking. Like, they are unusual in the highest usage of the word. It is mind-blowing. But see, Jesus cursed the fig tree. It says that he went out and he looked at this mature tree that had all this time to grow, had from Adam all the way up to John the Baptist to grow. And he looked at that tree, and although it was full of more leaves, more covering, it had no fruit. And so he cursed that tree and it died. You got to understand that symbol. All right. Now, a lot of the things that I have said just now and previously, I understand are controversial, to say the least. Here's the thing. Do not follow my path, as I said before. Why in the fuck would you follow a human? I mean, come on. The only reason I follow Jesus is because he seems unusual. And an argument could be made that I'm not even the best follower, i.e. my last video. However, my path has been my path, and don't think that I haven't carefully thought through lots and lots of it. And don't think that I don't make mistakes. I'm constantly learning. In fact, that's one of the pains of putting this kind of stuff out there is, it's just hard to know where you'll end up before you die, as far as spiritually. So I don't wish to influence anyone too heavily. If you find life in what you do and you're living according to the Spirit, bravo. Keep going, keep going. Let the fruits of the Spirit increase in your life. If you find that you are dead, the first thing is don't just go crazy in chaos. Do not rip down the house you have built and become a nomad. You will have a very, very rough life. If you tear down a house which was built on sand, then you must go and build again on something everlasting, like a rock. And you must build that house. And you can even take the planks and the wood and all of that stuff and you can use it over here, but it's the foundation that makes all of the difference. So that's just a little snippet of my journey spiritually, is that I found that I needed to evolve past the knowledge of good and evil, and I needed to walk in love, and that needed to be like the way that I follow is the way of love. And so I believe that all of the law is summed up basically in love. Because here's the thing, you will never have a perfect law. I mean, look at our law in America. So we have all the brightest minds working constantly to make this law more and more complicated. I mean, I work in a building that does bankruptcy, and oh my gosh, like just tomes of tomes. Am I even saying that right? I want to say tombs because that would be more accurate. But you know, these thick ass volumes, just libraries of the dullest shit you could imagine, and even that is not good enough to settle some cases. The idea that you can have this real binary, like super simple law structure from 2,000 years ago and somehow, you know, it can be perfectly relevant to today. Nope, not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. In fact, it's really interesting how much of it Christians actually ignore. For example, I guarantee you your eye offends you in some way. You may think that you have lust for women figured out, but maybe you lust for things. Maybe you lust for, I don't know, whatever you see. So gouge it out. Why don't you do that? If you really want to be as good as Christ, gouge your eye out to avoid that sin. That's what it says. Go ahead and do it. But you'll see that that was never the point. And sometimes you have to be brought to those extremes to break. And that's basically what Jesus did with the Pharisees. He brought them out into deep water, and he was like, okay, you want to hang with me out here? Let me show you how weak you actually are. And when you study his sayings, oh my gosh, especially according to the current like Jewish cultural mindset. Holy shit. I shouldn't even say that. Holy divine fruit. My goodness, man, the brilliance. I mean, it would be like Einstein toying with a child in arithmetic. It is breathtaking when you really dive into it. Hence the reason I mentioned a Messianic Jew. You really need to get away from American Christianity if you really want to go into it. If you really want to take a deep dive into the Bible, you have to learn from the Jews. Sorry, but you're going to have to humble yourself and learn from the people that he was talking to. No, they're not all evil, nasty Satanists trying to deceive Christians. They're actually very, very thoughtful people, and you need to learn from them. Okay? So anyways, I will leave you with this. Go look at this parable in Luke. Well, the story. A rich young ruler comes up to Jesus and says, "Look at me. I've kept the whole law." And today people are doing that left and right in some form or another. Yeah, they'll acknowledge sin, but deep down they do believe that they have really kept the law. And the reason I know that is because they're so judgmental. And you only get judgmental when you are deep, deep in the knowledge of good and evil. Because what you have to do is you have to judge yourself. And when you judge yourself, you judge everyone else. And typically, you judge them all as lower than you. So this guy, this judgmental guy, goes up to Jesus and says, "What do I lack?" And he says, "Aha, well, I'll tell you. Sell everything you have. Just get rid of it." And it says he went away sorrowful because he could not keep that commandment, that thou shalt not covet. So whenever you approach Jesus or the divine, whatever, the Tao, I don't care what word you use. Whenever you approach that with your own perfection, you will be destroyed. Either literally, if you're lucky, so that you can try to get out of it, pick up the pieces and build another house, or spiritually, you'll end up dead. You'll find that your relationship with God is very robotic. There's not that beating heart. You'll find that it's a marriage that's just so dry. It's like cohabitation rather than companionship. Now, so that's what he did to the rich young ruler. Now, this guy, because he said he kept the law perfectly, and he probably did, there were plenty of zealots, like Paul, for example. Turn the page. Jesus gets to another rich guy, except this guy is a thief. And most likely everybody hates him because he's a tax collector, Zacchaeus. And all Zacchaeus wanted was just to see Jesus. The poor guy had to climb up in a tree just to see. And he did that. Now, you got to understand, there's some symbolism in that. Because as a short guy, he could have just stayed hidden. And maybe the people around him would have hated him. But he was hidden. Now, he climbs up in this tree. Now, the entire crowd can see him. And you can imagine the type of judgment that he was under. People shouting, or else people just hating him in their heart. The whole crowd. And Jesus walks up to him and says, "Today I'll eat with you." And I just, that's the heart of the divine. That's the relationship that the divine desires. And that produced real change. Because we love, because the divine first loved us. We do start in hell. We do start in darkness. How do you get light? From the source. If the divine loves you, you will love back. But if you approach the divine with works, if you approach the divine like Cain did, with an offering of the work of your hands. Remember, the ground was cursed. The ground was cursed, so Cain had to work against the curse, and he provided his fruits to the divine. The divine said, nope, it's rubbish. And so you have to realize that And when you realize that and you just receive love and you're patient, you don't, no tree tries to produce fruit in its time. Be patient. Concern yourself with sinking roots. And then you'll be able to do as Zacchaeus did and start to love people because he was loved. So anyways, that is a little summary of where I'm at spiritually in the things that I've tried to live out. And at this point, I want to be totally done with this old type of consciousness, which is the knowledge of good and evil. And I am pushing with everything in my being to embrace the consciousness of the divine. Instead of being self-conscious, you be conscious of everything that the divine is, both in and of itself and in you. Because I do believe that we are some kind of divine being, fully connected to the divine being, fractal. I mean, I don't know. But that truth has become more and more clear to me, and it doesn't mean that I don't struggle with my faith in that area. But I find that faith is not forced belief, and faith is not taking your mind and like shoving it into this box and believing everything that everyone tells you. I find that faith is really just a type of trust where even if you feel like Zacchaeus, you're still climbing up in that tree and you're just saying, look at me, naked without shame. That's how you get into the divine like energy. That's how you start to resonate with the divine. That's what makes the divine notice and pour out love. All right, I got a lot of other things floating around in here, but videos get long and I don't want to just keep rambling. But thank you for listening, and if this has been difficult for you to hear, I do apologize, and I ask that you, say what you want to say, but just sit on it for a while. You can disregard 90% of it, but just be willing to look at it. That's all I'm saying. Because obviously I don't believe that I have everything figured out. But I have seen this stuff, and this is what I've seen. And so I will be honest with what I've seen and where I'm at. I'm really working on trusting the divine with all of that. Because it is a very scary thing, or it's a very vulnerable thing to be somewhere in no man's land between Christianity and New Age spirituality and everything in between. Because I don't know, I have yet to find a good label that I can apply to myself. And so in that case, when that is the case, it's no longer people that you need affirmation from. It's the divine itself. And so yes, these things are hard to share, and no, I am not 100% my confidence was shattered when I got out of Christianity. These are just my thoughts, and this is the best way I know of how to explain my path.